watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have all your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Simon Das, Director of 978 Finance and 978 Investment, all the way from Morecambe. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, yes. Good trip down?
Yeah, it was fair.
You weren't using HS2?
Not yet, no.
Is it not running yet?
Looking forward to that.
Okay, lovely. And joining Simon is Azid Gungah, founder and MD of Quiddity Group. Welcome to you, Azid. Good to see you back.
Thank you.
Right, well, we'll get straight on with the questioning. And Azid, you're going to go first. I'm considering starting to build my own property portfolio, initially with HMO properties. In doing my research, I've come across a huge variation of standards, both in terms of fit out and in some cases what in my view are safety risks. Do the panel think that current HMO regulation standards are consistent and indeed high enough across the board? It's a pretty broad question, isn't it?
It is pretty broad, and actually there's a lot of information out there. You Google HMO, oh my God, you're bombarded with a plethora of information. The answer to this question is actually there is government regulations, quite strict and clear guidelines that stipulate what has to happen in a HMO. So for example, there is a minimum standards and size of rooms. So a single person is 6.52, 10.2 for a couple. So there are actually pretty well defined regulations, and that is set for the whole country. And it came about because different councils over time were trying to do different things. So then central government stepped in and brought in this kind of set of rules.
Those issues would be the subject of your HMO license, would they?
Absolutely.
Right,
you will not, I mean, if you try to rent a room that is 3 square meters, it's just never going to pass. So there are some critical standards that has to be met. The size of the rooms. There used to be a rule around how high the property was, 3-story or more, then you needed a license. That's been discarded. So now the regulation is if you rent to 3 or more people who are not related in one household, that's classed as a HMO. Okay. It used to be 5. So the answer to the question for the viewer is no, there are very strict standardized rules that if you look at on .gov.co.uk type of sources, you will find the regulations that control HMOs. I guess the question that he's maybe talking about is the standards are different, and I think the standard that a developer will come up with will be different from one to the other. And I see a lot of developers currently are working for other people. They will go in and actually put ensuite in every single HMO rooms. Now, there's another challenge that's happening with that now because the councils are trying to ban those rooms as singular units so they can tax them. So the VOA are looking into whether they can actually tax those single rooms with an ensuite, with its own identity under one house. Can they get 5 council tax, if you like, under those? So I think the standards of how you finish a HMO is down to the developer, but what you have to meet, the criteria you have to meet to get a license for 5 years is very strictly controlled.
Let me ask you a question. When you apply for an HMO license, you obviously put it in writing, and presumably there's a set form that you fill out and give the relevant information.
That's right.
I was watching a programme some months ago about how overworked the councils were in checking food hygiene tests in the various restaurants in certain areas. And in some cases, some restaurants hadn't been checked for 2 or 3 years. And they were finding some pretty horrific results. Now, when you apply for your licence, is it taken on trust initially that you filled in the right information? And do the council actually follow that up with inspections? And if so, how often?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing that happens is you get a set of forms, depending on which council. You will download the form of that particular council and you'll fill it in with all the requirement details, room sizes, and then you will do sketches on that form of where your smoke alarm, where your fire doors are, etc., etc. You then file it in, you pay your fee, typically it's £1,000 to £1,500, depending on where you are, which council. So that's a great income generation for them. Then, because of the backlog, you wait. Typically pre-pandemic, we normally waited 2 to 3 months before we get somebody to come in and visit the actual site.
And can you operate before they come?
Technically, yes, if you've applied. But you need to be mindful that you are adhering to all the rules to make sure that you don't fall foul of each rule. So some people, if you're new to it, you'd better off wait and make sure you get the sign off from the inspector. But generally speaking, now we are waiting 6 months before somebody turns up and actually checks the property and signs it off and gives you the license.
Like a lot of things, so it's got an ongoing effect, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
If these waiting lists are there. Simon, do you have the same sort of system in Morecambe? Do you see much of this?
Yeah, absolutely. HMO regulations that exist all over the country. I'd say the question around are standards high enough, I think absolutely the regulatory standards that are set are high enough. Most new HMOs are like boutique hotels, ensuite bathrooms. The safety measures in place are far higher than in most people's residential dwellings. So I think the standards are high enough, but they're not consistent because local authorities change things slightly. And I think it would make sense for the government just to step in and go, this is the standard throughout, either it's suitable for human habitation or it's not. It's safe for humans or it's not. So if they standardise that, then the local authorities, the lenders, the managers, they would all be singing, and indeed the tenants would all be singing off the same hymn sheet. And I think that would be great progress.
Yes. I think it's a little bit like sort of permitted development rights, isn't it? The councils have suddenly learned to say, yes, but. And this is distorting standards and adjudications across the country, isn't it? All right, thank you for that, gentlemen. Simon. Do the panel think the government's promises to level up opportunities for the north of England are actually working? And can you in particular identify any particular successes so far?
Oh, let me rack my brain.
Yeah, I was going to say that. We do like to test people on the show.
So the levelling up agenda, is it an agenda or is it a conversation at the moment? I think there was £4.5 billion put into the Levelling Up Fund last year for distribution in 2021, and some 1.6 billion of that actually left the government's purse. So
between how many authorities?
I don't know the number. I think I seem to remember around 50 authorities got 28. I think got rejected. There was a few that didn't apply, and about 20 or so. 20-something received some money.
Sounds a bit dismal, doesn't it?
It does really. So it's it's not working the way it's meant to be working. Levelling up is occurring more, as far as I see, from the private sector. People moving up north with their businesses, saving money on rates, on rents, on labour. And that's making a gradual difference. One thing that does sound very positive is the Freeport that they're talking about over in Teesside that's been approved. That's due to bring 18,000 jobs and £3.5 billion to the local economy in 5 years. So if that takes off, then great, but they should be doing 4 or 5 of them very quickly to really make a difference. They won't. It's very unlikely. I'm holding my breath for autumn because we've got a fantastic project in Morecambe, the Eden Project North. They've just put in for a bid. Well, I think the bid goes in next month for £50 million from the Levelling Up Fund. And ask me this question again after they have approved that in the autumn.
I mean, I think one of the things I'd like to ask you, Simon, you're somebody who's heavily involved in the regeneration of Morecambe and the surrounding areas. I mean, it's a particularly beautiful part of the country. But do you make your plans? Do you try to influence things on the basis of hopefully getting something from the government? Or do you do it on the basis of, well, you know, below the government, we're here, this is what we've got, let's try and make it really work, and then if we get something from the government, then it's going to be cream on top, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we don't rely at all on anything that the government is.
I mean, when I watch the news stories,
it
it seems to me that some areas are saying, well, come on government, but you know, I'm intrigued as to where they think this money's coming from.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the private sector are taking it on the chin and making sure they make the most of what opportunities available. And yes, if something comes in from the government, then great. We've tried to tap into the Green Home grants to help some of our landlords improve the energy efficiency of their properties, and that was a very difficult process, and didn't have.
I was
much
saying to you
success.
in the break that I think that something like the Eden project is great because it's educational. It's a very soft way of educating people about green issues and about the environment and about how we need to behave as human beings, rather than just slapping a 20% green tax on your electricity bill. I just one works and one doesn't for me. And I think if we can just gently educate children today and even adults that want to go about things we should be aware of, I think that's a tremendous project, and good luck with that. So there we are, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after break when we'll ask Simon and Azid some more of your questions.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Azid Gungah and Simon Das. Welcome back, guys. Azid, what do the panel think of the various proposals set out in the government's white paper outlining the conditions to be included in the ideal rental agreement? And further, do they think it appropriate for government to be deciding these conditions?
So let's start with what are the kind of
nothing controversial.
Yeah, nothing controversial. But I would start with some of the kind of the key highlights of the proposed changes. The biggest one is this abolition of the Section 21. So the ability for a landlord to what they call evict tenants after the agreement's finished. So that's going to come out because that sounds good. That you're going to kick this no-fault eviction that it became to be called at. Through this new agreement. Now, just to then add to this, because you get Section 21 out, the government is also proposing that they are going to reinforce the grounds for repossession of properties by landlords. The key ones that comes to mind is antisocial behaviour. So tenants are not behaving, you've got good grounds to evict. Non-payment, we're going to, which is now currently called Section 8 notice, will be reinforced. And the third one is around how do you then get your property back if you either want to sell or you want to move into it. Those will be your kind of core grounds for landlords to take back their property. So really the change that they're proposing for landlords is actually not that detrimental as some people are saying, oh, we're going to squeeze the landlords. No landlords as a kind of business want to push out their good paying customers. That's the first thing. So this new changes is not going to affect anything to do with this. What they are looking at doing is stopping some, and we all work in this environment, there are some rogue operators. And I think it's right that the regulations are brought in to stop them. So landlords who come in and say, you know what, actually I'm going to put your rent up arbitrarily with no consultation, no timelines, that's going to stop. No pets, I think that's a big one that everybody talks about. You will be allowed to have your pets because, you know, we are a nation of pet lovers. So you will not be able to say you can't move in because you've got a pet. So there are some good stuff that's coming in that for tenants benefits. But overall, I think, again, it is nothing new that we don't currently have. We're just sounding...
Just hold on. Can I just
please
pull you up on some of those? I'm quite interested in this. It's a long time since I was involved in any letting, but so does this no fault eviction? Is there not a fourth thing? What happens when short-hold tenancies are going to be finished, aren't they? So what's it going to be called now?
It's going to be a rolling tenancy.
Rolling tenancy.
Periodic tenancy, I think.
Periodic. So you're at the end of your 12 months.
Yep.
Can you as a landlord then finish it at that point?
technically, yes, if there's a date that the contract will end. But I don't think now that the
You see,
proposal there's going to be no date.
See, I'm not
think
sure
that's
you're
the
right.
case.
No.
I don't think that's the case. I think unless you have one of those reasons, you
Okay.
cannot evict your tenant, which is, there's a lot of reasons why you might need to evict. And
Well, you see, I think that's a fundamental point. I mean, people get fed up with me saying it on this programme, but I say this, you know, your tenant signs a lease, you've written a lease, so you're obviously both happy with it, you both read it, you both signed it, so why the hell don't you just do what it says?
Yes.
So in other words, if it's for 12 months, it's 12 months and it's finished.
Yes.
So I don't like that question over that point.
Yes.
And I'm very surprised that you don't know truly the answer, because I've tried to research this, and I can't get a definitive answer on it. And if people like you that are heavily involved in you know, that business can't get a definite reading, this is doomed to failure. Okay, that's one. Second thing, I you know, for 16 years I've been a magistrate in the City of London and in Westminster, and I can tell you now, to judge whether somebody is actually embarking on a path of antisocial behaviour is very, very hard to actually define and prove. So my question there would be to you, so if your eviction purposes because of antisocial behaviour, who's adjudicated that? Is it your view? Is it necessary to have a court order to back it up? From
what I've read, they're looking for convicted of antisocial behaviour. Now, how long is it going to take to get someone convicted of antisocial behaviour?
Well, at the moment, I can tell you something like that could probably take in excess of a year to get to court.
Wow.
Meanwhile, you've got potentially, if you're in a block of flats, you've got other tenants that are living in
I mean,
fear.
you know, we've all seen antisocial behaviour in one form or another, and it is so distressing for co-tenants and particularly elderly persons. You can't underrate the cost of somebody's life, can you? Of being disturbed in that way. So I just think coming back, and Simon sort of mentioned this in a previous answer, we've got this government who just seem to be very keen on the sound bites, getting the publicity for something without actually thinking it through.
And I think goes back to this kind of the time contract. I'm finding it very hard to find a definitive answer, because we can't really find it. It's not there to say this is the process, this is the proposal. And also there's another concern, is if you have an open-ended contract, how would lenders look at this now? Because if there's a problem with the tenant, you then, or the landlord doesn't pay, who inherits? So does the lender inherit this?
Well, the lender would, under normal circumstances, if people did it properly, and I don't think there are all that many that do, but if it was done properly and consent was sought from the lender, he's not going to give consent for an open-ended arrangement.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be another challenge that government is not even talking about. So we just don't know enough of the detail. I think the details are just not quite there yet.
No. Okay, anything to add to that, Simon?
Section 21 was the no-fault eviction route. Section 8 was where tenant is at fault. Now, the proposal on paper doesn't make a huge difference other than this question around length of tenancies. But I think it will be absolutely fine if the Section 8 fault evictions were all mandatory, pretty much all mandatory. So it's very clear that if a tenant is over 2 months late on their rent, they could get evicted. It's very clear if antisocial behaviour occurs, a tenant gets evicted. And that way both parties are protected, they know where they stand, but there's still a lot of these elements that are coming into this new proposal that are not, they're not absolute. It's up to a judge to decide ultimately, and that process is going to take a long time, and it's not going to benefit landlords or tenants in the long run, I don't believe.
Well, I mean, there's two things on that. I mean, again, going back to Thatcher era, but she brought in the short-hold tenancies, which made it clear that you could let your property for a designated period of time, and as a landlord, you could get your property back at the appropriate point. And that did an awful lot to provide stock for the rental market, didn't it? So it was good, and they seem to be going back on that now. I'm sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to just say, Azid, which is a difficult one, I know. On this pet business, so again, I live across the road here, and there's 600 flats in there, and in the head lease it says you shall not have a pet or any animal of any kind. So will this legislation overrule my head lease?
Well, technically, you have to have a alteration to that lease. So your freeholder will have to, presumably, be forced to change the rules of that lease or the wordings of that lease?
Well, that's going to take a deed of variation.
That's right.
Which for say 600 people is probably going to cost £1,000 a time.
Yeah.
Who's paying for that? You got no answer for that one.
I have no answer for you on that one. But it's a tricky one though, because you replicate that across the country for different kind of changes. I mean, this seems a very hard, unworkable policy yet again.
It does to me. And again, the government minister concerned, I think it was Gove, was on television saying, look, it's not a problem because landlords can just insist on a bigger deposit to cover for the damage. No, there's a 5-week limit to the deposit you can put down, and I'd bet my last quid that most landlords are at the 5 weeks already.
Well, it's certainly, people are getting pushed in that direction. You're not allowed to deny someone a property for having a pet, but a landlord can still just say, I'm not renting to this person. Simple as. So.
All right. Well, I hope your answer to the next one, Simon, is going to be fairly quick and concise because we're a bit tight on time. But I'm new to property development and I'm looking to create a small commercial portfolio. My bankers advise that initially I take out bridging loans for the purchases and look for long-term funding later. What do the panel think about this advice? And I'd be grateful if they could explain the logic behind this idea. At first glance, it seems a pretty expensive and costly way of doing things. And I'm presuming what he means by that is that he's going to be in for 2 lots of arrangement fees, is he?
Well, yes. And bridging finance is more expensive than buy-to-let mortgages, but there's a very simple reason. Buy-to-let mortgages, you cannot borrow on a property that is not in a lettable condition. So more than a lick of paint and new carpets, most lenders will say, no, we're not giving you a buy-to-let mortgage, which means that whole theory of going into a property and adding value by doing a fairly heavy refurbishment is off the table if you're going on to a buy-to-let mortgage. So if you take that more expensive form of debt initially, you can buy a house without a kitchen, without a bathroom, you can do a heavy refurbishment, and then you can add value and build in equity at the start of your property investment, which is a real good hedge against other risks further down the line. So
in Boris speak, what you're saying is you need it to be oven ready to get the longer term mortgage. No? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And you just need to put that into your development appraisal. Cost of tiles, cost of painting, cost of a kitchen, cost of finance. Is my 20-25% profit still there? Yes. Just make sure you've got at least 2 exits. Sell the property to pay the lender back, refinance the property to pay the lender back, or it's ideal to have 3 because that's where you don't want it leading. Getting stuck on a bridge is not an option for us.
Okay, well that's really a great answer and spot on time too. So thank you very much for that. Gentlemen, Simon Das, Azid Gungah, thank you both very much for taking part in today's programme. Great answers, very helpful. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. Look forward to seeing you then.